Now, Iran says details of a possible deal with the US are being drawn up ahead of renewed talks, which is due to get underway on Thursday. That after Washington's envoy, Steve Witkoff, publicly wondered why Tehran has not yet, as he put it, capitulated. Over the weekend, Iranian students holding renewed protests in Iran. Well, for more on the situation between Iran and the US, our international affairs editor Kethevane Gorjestani is with me here on set. Kethevane, expecting then this third round of talks this week. Are they any closer to a deal?
Well, look, there's quite a bit of public cautious optimism from all sides, including the mediators, the Omanis, who sort of confirmed these talks were going ahead, with the Omani foreign minister saying it was a positive push to go the extra mile towards finalizing a deal. So we're not there yet, but everyone is saying that there is still a possibility of a deal. The Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, he said that the initial talks had yielded encouraging signals, and Donald Trump, the U.S. president, claimed that Iran was close to making a deal. But so far, when you look into the details, there seems to be a little bit of movement, but it doesn't look like either side has made such big concessions that we could be really on the verge of an agreement. First of all, the United States wants zero uranium enrichment from the Iranians. Unclear whether the Iranians are willing to agree to that. Then there's the question of what happens to the already enriched uranium. There seems to be a little bit of movement. The Americans want the Iranians to basically ship off all of the enriched uranium. The Iranians saying, well, we could ship some of it, and then we can dilute some of the rest, so there could be movement there. There's also the issue of the Americans wanting to expand the talks beyond just the nuclear program, talk about the missile program, talk about the proxies. Now, on the latter, on the proxies, there again, maybe a little bit of movement from the Iranians when it comes to supporting the likes of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of the Houthis. However, there doesn't seem to be any movement when it comes to the missile program that the Iranians really see as key to their survival. And finally, there's the question of the scope and the mechanism of lifting the sanctions, because, of course, the Americans are asking for a lot, but in return, what the Iranians want is really for the Americans to lift those sanctions. How many sanctions will be lifted, how quickly, all of those things still have to be determined, and it doesn't look, at least publicly, that we're any closer to that.
So despite all of that, then a US military operation still very much on the cards?
Absolutely. And Donald Trump does say that there is going to be possibly a deal, but he also insists that if there is no deal, in his words, then very bad things will happen. And to sort of comforts this idea that the Americans are prepared to go the military way. There is that armada in the Middle East. You have the largest really military deployment in decades, perhaps, for the Americans. 13 warships currently present. You have, of course, we talked a lot about the aircraft carrier, the USS Lincoln, but there is another aircraft carrier on its way entering the Mediterranean. It seems that will be closer to the Middle East. Dozens of warplanes, and of course the tens of thousands of U.S. troops that are already stationed in the Middle East. There are two strategies there. One goal, of course, is to show the Iranians that they are prepared to actually go forward with a possible military strike, so to prepare for military action, and also to prepare for the possible retaliation to a military action. But the other strategy is also to put pressure on the Iranians to try to twist their arm into coming to the negotiating table and into agreeing to concessions. But it seems that it's not quite turning out the way Donald Trump was actually expecting it. And you mentioned those comments by Steve Witkoff. Let's listen to exactly what he had to say.
I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated? Why under this sort of pressure, with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do, and yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
And the response, of course, from the Iranians was pretty quick, with the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, posting this on X. Curious to know why we do not capitulate, he asks, because we are Iranian. Sort of defiant tone from the Iranians who are telling the Americans that they're ready.
Yeah, that's exactly the next step, isn't it? Because you talked about how the Americans are ready. What about the Iranians? Are they preparing for some kind of military action?
They're absolutely preparing for this, and most of the leadership in Iran, whether it's the supreme leader, whether it's the president, the foreign minister, they've all said something to the extent of, we're ready for any scenario. We're willing to talk, but we're also ready for war if the Americans strike us. And they've also put forward their military might, showing, especially, for example, their missile program. So they're showing how they could retaliate, especially when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, where they've shown that they can cause some trouble there if they want. They're also showing that they're preparing for a military action from the Americans by preparing politically for possible leadership change, whether it's the Ayatollah himself or the generals that are very important in the state apparatus. Should any one of these key figures be killed, there is a plan for succession. Who would replace them? All of this is being planned out and has been planned out for months now. But really, the strategy of the Iranians is to very specifically tell the Americans the way the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei told them just last week. He said, the strongest army in the world can sometimes be slapped so hard it cannot get up. Their message is not, we're going to be able to beat the American military. Their message is, yes, you are a giant militarily compared to us, but we have ways of making it very, very difficult for you. What are those ways? They've said it very clearly and publicly many times. We can target any of the U.S. interests in the region. I was talking about those tens of thousands of troops that are based in the region. They're all within striking distance of Iranian missiles. And the other thing that the Iranians know full well is that they can lose generals, they can lose soldiers. It doesn't really matter in their state, in their regime. If Donald Trump loses one U.S. soldier, if something happens in the region, that could have way more political consequences for the U.S. president than for the Iranian regime, especially since, of course, we are in an election year with the midterms coming up at the end of the year in November.